She was sold into a marriage, she feared. The cowboy promised, "I'll wait till you're ready." The desert stretched endlessly under the harsh sun, its golden sands rippling like waves in an ocean of silence. Nayeli, a young Apache woman, walked carefully along a narrow trail, her feet sinking slightly into the warm sand with each step. The wind whipped around her, carrying dust that stung her eyes, but she did not stop. She had been traveling for days, leaving behind her village and family to avoid danger that she could not fully explain. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, the heavy uncertainty of what lay ahead, and a longing for safety she had never truly known. The sky, once a brilliant blue, darkened suddenly. Clouds, heavy and gray, gathered quickly above the desert, casting shadows over the dunes. Nayeli's heart raced as she realized a storm was coming. She had traveled far, relying on her knowledge of the land and the stars to guide her, but this storm threatened to undo all her careful planning. The wind grew stronger, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of danger. She knew she could not continue safely without shelter. In the distance, she spotted a small building perched on the edge of a hill. Its wooden walls were weathered and worn, but it looked sturdy enough to provide protection from the storm. Gathering her courage, Nayeli approached the house, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and fear. She knocked softly at first, then louder when no one answered, her voice barely rising above the howling wind. "Please," she called out, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I only need shelter for the night." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a tall man with kind eyes and a wary expression. His clothes were simple but clean, and his hands were calloused from work, proof of a life spent tending to the land. Nayeli could see surprise in his eyes at the sight of her, a lone Apache woman standing in the doorway, but there was also a trace of compassion.
"It's dangerous out there," he said, his voice calm and measured.
"Come in. You can stay tonight." Relief washed over Nayeli, and she stepped inside quickly, grateful for the warmth and the protection the house offered. The interior was modest but inviting. A small fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with light and heat. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the faint scent of herbs that hung in bunches from the ceiling. Nayeli took a deep breath, letting the tension in her body ease slightly as she sat near the fire. The man introduced himself as John, and despite his initial caution, he treated her with respect and gentleness. He offered her some bread and warm milk, simple fare, but more than enough for someone who had traveled as far as she had. Nayeli accepted with gratitude, her hands trembling slightly as she ate. She realized how hungry she had been, not just for food, but for kindness, for human connection after days of isolation. As the storm raged outside, the two of them sat near the fire, the room filled with the soft crackling of burning wood. They began to talk, carefully at first, sharing small pieces of their lives. Nayeli spoke of her family, her village, and the hardships she had faced as a young woman trying to survive in a world that often seemed cruel and unforgiving. She did not hide her fears or her pain, but she also showed strength, the quiet resilience that had carried her this far. John listened intently, asking questions with genuine interest. He told her about his life on the ranch, about the long days spent tending animals and caring for the land. He spoke of his dreams, simple but heartfelt, of a life filled with peace and honesty. Nayeli found herself drawn to his calm presence, the way he seemed to understand without judgment, and the quiet strength that radiated from him. The night grew darker, the storm outside intensifying, but inside, the small room felt safe and warm. They shared stories of childhood memories, of laughter and sorrow, of small victories and losses. Nayeli told John about the Apache traditions she had grown up with, about the songs and dances, the stories passed down through generations, and the deep respect her people held for nature and the land. John listened with fascination, realizing how little he knew of the world beyond his own experiences. As the hours passed, a subtle bond began to form between them. It was not yet love, not in the way one might think of it, but a deep sense of respect and understanding. They were two strangers brought together by circumstance, yet in that room, in the face of the storm, they found a connection that neither had expected. Naeli felt a strange sense of relief in sharing her story, and John felt a warmth he had not realized he had been missing in his solitary life. Outside, the wind howled and rain began to fall, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. Naeli watched the shadows dance on the walls as the fire flickered, feeling a sense of calm she had not known in a long time. She thought of the long journey ahead, of the uncertainty that still awaited her, but for the first time, she felt that perhaps she was not entirely alone. There was someone who had seen her, truly seen her, and treated her with kindness. When the fire burned low and the night grew late, John offered her a small bed near the hearth. Naeli hesitated for a moment, unused to such comfort and hesitant to impose, but she accepted. She curled under the blankets, listening to the storm outside and the gentle creaks of the house settling. Her mind wandered, thinking of her village, her family, and the life she had left behind. She wondered what tomorrow would bring, but she also felt a small spark of hope, a feeling she had not allowed herself in a long time. John sat nearby, tending the fire and keeping watch over the small room. He thought about the unexpected visitor who had arrived at his door, about the courage it had taken to seek shelter, and about the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. He could not deny that he felt a sense of responsibility for her, a desire to protect and ensure her safety. And though he did not yet understand what it meant, he sensed that this night would be remembered, that something significant had begun. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the small windows, the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean and sparkling under the early sun. Naeli awoke slowly, stretching and gathering her few belongings. She felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness, knowing that she could not stay forever, that she had only come seeking shelter for one night. She offered her thanks to John, her voice soft but sincere, and he smiled, telling her that she was always welcome. As she stepped outside, the wind gently brushing her face, Naeli looked back at the house, at the man who had shown her kindness when she had nowhere else to turn. She knew she would never forget this night, the warmth of the fire, the safety she had found, and the connection that had begun in the most unexpected way. She walked toward the horizon, carrying with her not just the memory of shelter, but the beginning of a story she could not yet imagine. Naeli had intended to leave John's home at first light, just as she had planned the night before. She had only wanted shelter for one night, a brief refuge from the storm that had caught her unprepared in the desert. But when she stepped outside that morning, she found the aftermath of the storm more severe than she had expected. The winds had torn through the landscape, uprooting small bushes and leaving deep ruts in the sandy paths. The journey ahead now seemed dangerous, perhaps even impossible, until the land had settled. She looked back at John's house, a solid structure that had protected her through the night, and realized that leaving immediately might not be safe. John noticed her hesitation. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "The storm did more damage than I thought," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It would be safer to stay here until the desert settles." Naeli considered his words. She knew he was right. The trail ahead would be treacherous, and she did not have the strength to navigate it alone while the land was unstable. She nodded silently, her heart a mixture of relief and guilt. She had never intended to impose, Yet circumstances seemed to have a plan of their own. As the hours passed, Naeli and John began to work together. There were fences torn down by the wind, scattered tools, and stray animals that needed tending. They moved side by side, communicating through gestures, simple words, and occasional smiles. At first, Naeli felt awkward. She had never done this kind of work with anyone before. But as she learned the rhythm of the ranch, she discovered a surprising sense of satisfaction in the labor. It was honest work, demanding and challenging, yet it grounded her in the present moment, taking her mind off the worries that had plagued her journey. John watched her carefully, noticing how she handled herself with quiet strength. She was careful, precise, and surprisingly skilled for someone he had assumed was only a traveler seeking shelter. He admired her determination, the way she seemed unafraid to face the tasks before her, even when the wind still blew fiercely across the land. Naeli, for her part, observed John with a growing curiosity. He was patient and calm, never rushing, always attentive to the details of his work. She saw in him a man who was both strong and gentle, a combination that was rare and comforting. During their work, they began to share more about their lives. Naeli spoke of the long night she had spent under the open sky, of the lessons her parents had taught her about survival, respect, and courage. She described the Apache traditions, the dances, the songs, and the stories of their ancestors that had been passed down through generations. John listened with genuine interest, amazed by the depth of her knowledge and the passion in her voice. He realized that she had lived a life filled with lessons, experiences, and wisdom far beyond her years. In turn, John told Naeli about the ranch, about the challenges of living in such a remote place, and the small joys that came from caring for the land and the animals. He spoke of his childhood, of learning to ride horses before he could walk steadily, and of the dreams he had once held that had slowly transformed into the simpler goal of a peaceful, honest life. Naeli found herself drawn to his stories, to the sincerity in his voice, and to the quiet laughter that occasionally escaped him when recalling a fond memory. Days passed, and the storm outside gradually gave way to calm skies. Yet Naeli's stay at the ranch extended longer than she had planned. The desert was still difficult to traverse, and she could not risk leaving too soon. During this time, their bond deepened, though neither fully understood the changes occurring in their hearts. They worked together seamlessly, fixing fences, tending to the animals, and gathering food. They shared meals by the fire, their conversations flowing easily now, no longer just stories of survival, but glimpses into who they were as people. The routine brought them closer, creating a rhythm that neither of them had expected. Naeli began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known before. She admired John's quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, and his patience. She felt safe with him, not just physically, but emotionally, a feeling she had rarely allowed herself to experience. John, too, found a sense of peace in Naeli's presence. Her courage, her honesty, and her gentle humor brought warmth to his solitary life. He realized that her stay, which he had initially considered temporary, was becoming something more significant. Despite their growing closeness, challenges remained. The small town nearby had noticed Naeli's presence, and whispers of gossip began to circulate. Some townspeople were suspicious, unable to understand why a young Apache woman would be staying with a rancher. John faced subtle criticism, and Naeli sensed the wary glances cast in her direction whenever she ventured into town. It was a reminder that the world outside the ranch did not fully accept their connection, and both felt the weight of societal judgment pressing on them. One afternoon, as they worked to repair a section of fence damaged by the storm, an accident occurred. One of John's ranch hands, a young man unfamiliar with the desert terrain, stepped on a rattlesnake hidden in the brush. The snake struck quickly, its venomous fangs piercing the man's leg. Panic erupted among the workers, but Naeli remained calm. Drawing on her knowledge of herbs and natural remedies, she applied a poultice to slow the venom's spread and instructed the men on how to keep the injured man calm until John could bring him to safety. Her quick thinking and courage impressed everyone present, and for the first time, some townspeople began to see her not just as a visitor, but as someone capable and brave. That evening, after the injured man had recovered enough to rest, John and Naeli sat quietly by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that had grown during their shared work and challenges. Naeli spoke softly, reflecting on how unexpected this experience had been. She had come seeking only shelter for one night, yet here she was, a part of someone's life in ways she had never imagined. John, too, reflected on the changes in his heart, realizing that he valued her presence far more than he had expected, and that her courage, wisdom, and gentleness had touched him deeply. Over the following days, Naeli began to feel a sense of home she had never known. She took pleasure in the simple routines of the ranch, from feeding the animals to preparing meals, from mending tools to tending the small garden John maintained. Each task, no matter how ordinary, felt meaningful when shared with someone who understood and respected her. John noticed the light in her eyes, the subtle smiles that had become more frequent, and he felt a growing admiration for the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. Though their bond strengthened, Naeli still wrestled with uncertainty. She knew that her journey could not last forever, and she feared the day she might have to leave. She worried about fitting into John's world, about the prejudices that still lingered outside the ranch, and about the life she had left behind. Yet, in spite of these doubts, she could not deny the connection she felt with John, the sense of safety, understanding, and respect that had grown between them in such a short time. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Naeli and John sat on the porch, watching the desert stretch endlessly before them. The air was still, and the world seemed to hold its breath. John reached out and gently held her hand, a simple gesture filled with unspoken meaning. Naeli did not pull away. Instead, she felt the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his presence, and the unspoken promise of companionship and care. At that moment, Naeli realized that her journey had changed in ways she could never have anticipated. What had begun as a single night of shelter had grown into a partnership built on trust, respect, and a quiet understanding of each other's hearts. She did not know what the future held, but she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, for the first time, she had found a place where she truly belonged. As the stars appeared in the night sky, sparkling like tiny lanterns above the desert, Naeli and John remained on the porch, talking softly, laughing occasionally, and sharing the silence together. The bond that had begun with a simple act of kindness had deepened into something far more meaningful, a connection neither of them had expected, but both had come to cherish. And as the desert night embraced them, they felt that, for now, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Life on the ranch had begun to settle into a rhythm, yet not all challenges were behind Naeli and John. The bond between them had grown strong, built through shared work, trust, and quiet companionship. But outside the walls of the ranch, the world was less understanding. Rumors had started to circulate in the nearby town about the young Apache woman staying with John, and some people were not pleased. Their whispers carried disapproval, often questioning why a man from the town would allow a stranger, someone from a different culture, into his home. The prejudice and suspicion weighed heavily on both Naeli and John, though neither let it show openly. Naeli could feel the subtle glances whenever she ventured into town. Women whispered behind their hands, and men looked on with cautious curiosity. She sensed that some viewed her presence as improper, even dangerous, though she had done nothing to warrant suspicion. She had come seeking shelter, nothing more. Yet the world seemed determined to judge her for it. Despite this, Naeli held her head high. She had faced dangers far worse than judgment, and she knew she could endure the whispers and stares. John, however, was troubled by the quiet criticism. He had always lived a simple, honest life, and he had expected the community to respect basic decency. To hear that his actions were being questioned hurt him more than he had anticipated. He knew he had done nothing wrong by offering shelter to someone in need, yet some townspeople could not see beyond their own biases. Still, he remained steadfast, knowing that he could protect Naeli from harm and support her in the face of this subtle hostility. One afternoon, as they worked in the fields repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent windstorm, a young ranch hand named Samuel approached them, his expression anxious. "John," he said hesitantly, "I don't want to be disrespectful, but some people in town are talking. They say it's, unusual for Naeli to be here." John nodded, listening without anger.
"Let them talk," he replied calmly. "We are not doing anything wrong."
"She is under my roof, and she has every right to be here." Naeli overheard this and felt a warm sense of gratitude. John's support was unwavering, and it gave her courage to continue living openly despite the judgment of others. The incident with the townspeople did not deter Naeli. Instead, it strengthened her resolve to contribute meaningfully to the ranch and to show her worth not through words, but through actions. She became more involved in the daily work, taking on responsibilities with determination. She tended to the animals, repaired fences, and helped with the garden, demonstrating skills that impressed both John and the ranch hands. Slowly, the people who had whispered and judged began to notice her competence and bravery, though acceptance came slowly, and some continued to treat her with suspicion. One day, a more serious challenge arose. A rattlesnake, hiding in the brush near the corral, bit one of the ranch hands, causing panic among the workers. Naeli remained calm. She had learned much about the land from her tribe, including knowledge of natural remedies for snake bites. She quickly applied a poultice made from herbs she had seen growing nearby, instructing the other ranch hands to keep the injured man calm while John fetched medical help from town. Her quick thinking saved the man's life, and the event marked a turning point. Many who had doubted her abilities began to see her courage and intelligence, and some began to respect her as a person of strength. The days that followed the incident brought both relief and quiet reflection. Naeli realized that she was slowly carving out a place for herself, not just on the ranch, but in the wider community. She also recognized that her feelings for John were changing. What had started as simple gratitude for his kindness was evolving into something deeper. She admired his fairness, his patience, and his unwavering decency. She found comfort in his presence and began to hope for a future where she could belong, not just temporarily, but permanently. John, too, was becoming aware of his feelings. He admired Naeli's courage, her intelligence, and her resilience. He noticed the small things, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her people, the gentle care she showed for the animals, the quiet determination she displayed in every task she undertook. He began to realize that he valued her presence far more than he had anticipated. She was no longer just a guest. She had become an essential part of his life, someone whose absence he could not easily imagine. Despite their growing connection, both were aware of the social and cultural challenges that lay ahead. The world outside the ranch was not yet ready to accept their bond fully. Prejudices persisted, and the weight of expectations from their respective communities loomed over them. Naeli worried that, despite her admiration for John, she might never truly belong in his world. She feared rejection, misunderstanding, and the possibility that their growing friendship could be disrupted by forces beyond their control. John, too, worried about her safety and happiness, knowing that their relationship, if it deepened, would face scrutiny and challenges from the townspeople. Yet, even with these challenges, they continued to support one another. They found solace in the quiet moments they shared after long days of work. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, they would sit together by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes comfortable silence. In those moments, the world outside the ranch seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them connected by trust, respect, and the growing warmth of companionship. One evening, Naeli and John were repairing the roof of the barn together. The task required balance, teamwork, and careful communication. As they worked side by side, the rhythm of their collaboration was almost effortless. Naeli passed tools to John, held beams in place, and offered suggestions when necessary. John followed her instructions and marveled at her ingenuity. When a particularly strong gust of wind threatened to tip one of the beams, Naeli's quick reflexes prevented an accident. They exchanged a look of mutual respect and silent acknowledgement of each other's abilities. After the work was completed, they sat on the porch, watching the desert stretch endlessly before them. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and warm sand. Naeli reflected on how far she had come since the night she first knocked on John's door seeking shelter. She had come seeking safety for a single night, yet she had found companionship, trust, and perhaps the beginnings of something deeper. John, too, sat quietly, thinking about how unexpected life could be. A single act of kindness had brought a courageous, intelligent, and strong-willed woman into his life, and he could not imagine the days ahead without her presence. The night brought stars so bright that they seemed almost close enough to touch. Naeli and John spoke softly of dreams and hopes, of simple pleasures and distant memories. They shared laughter, light-hearted stories, and thoughtful reflections. In these quiet moments they found a sense of peace and belonging, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. The bond between them had grown stronger than either had anticipated, and it became clear that the connection formed through shelter, work, and shared experience was becoming something enduring. As the desert winds whispered around the ranch, both Naeli and John realized that the world outside might not fully understand or accept their relationship. Yet within the walls of the ranch they had created a space of mutual respect, support, and understanding. The trials of gossip, suspicion, and prejudice could not diminish the growing admiration and affection they felt for one another. Naeli had come seeking shelter for one night, but the days that followed revealed that her presence had the power to transform both their lives in ways neither had expected. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silver glow over the desert, Naeli and John had settled into a quiet, comfortable silence. They understood, without words, that their bond was no longer temporary or superficial. It was built on shared experience, mutual respect, and the courage to face the world together. The challenges of the outside community would continue, but within the safety and trust of the ranch, they had found a place where they could be themselves and support each other fully. Naeli realized that she had begun to consider John not just as a protector or friend, but as someone she deeply cared for. She felt gratitude, admiration, and perhaps the earliest stirrings of love. John, in turn, recognized that his feelings went beyond responsibility or companionship. He valued her wisdom, courage, and presence in his life more than he had imagined possible. Though the path ahead would be difficult, and acceptance from the broader community uncertain, both were committed to navigating it together. And so, life on the ranch continued. Days were filled with work, challenges, and occasional moments of joy. Nights brought quiet reflection, shared stories, and growing understanding. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a reminder of both the harshness of the world and the beauty of connection. Naeli and John, brought together by chance, had discovered that courage, kindness, and respect could overcome fear and prejudice. And in that discovery, they had laid the foundation for a bond that would guide them through the trials of the days to come. The desert had grown calm. The storms of the past now just memories etched into the sandy land. The ranch was quiet, the animals grazing peacefully, the wind carrying only a gentle whisper across the fields. Yet within this calm, Naeli felt a growing restlessness. She had spent weeks at John's ranch, longer than she had ever expected, and each passing day made leaving harder. She had arrived seeking shelter for one night, a temporary refuge, but now the thought of going back into the world alone filled her with fear. John noticed her unease. She would sometimes pause while tending the animals, staring out toward the horizon with a faraway look in her eyes. Other times, she would walk silently along the fence line, deep in thought. He knew that she was considering leaving, perhaps feeling that her presence at the ranch could never truly be permanent. The thought made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar feeling. He realized he did not want her to leave. Not ever. The quiet bond that had grown between them had become too important, too essential to his life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert sky in soft hues of orange and pink, John approached Naeli while she was gathering water from the well. The air was still, carrying only the faint scent of sage and dust. He spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "Naeli," he said, "you've been quiet today. Are you thinking of leaving?" Naeli looked down, brushing her fingers against the wooden bucket. I don't know," she admitted. "I never intended to stay this long. I only came for shelter, just for one night. I'm not sure I belong here." Her voice carried a mix of sadness and uncertainty. John reached out and gently lifted her chin so she could meet his eyes. "Ah, you do belong," he said firmly. "You've brought strength, courage, and life into this place. I don't want you to leave, Naeli. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever if you don't want to." Her heart skipped a beat. She had never heard words so direct, so sincere. She wanted to speak, to express the gratitude, fear, and hope swirling within her, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She realized that her feelings for John had deepened far beyond simple appreciation for his kindness. She admired him, respected him, and perhaps, though she had not yet allowed herself to admit it, she was beginning to care for him in ways she had never felt before. Over the next few days, the ranch seemed different. The air between them carried a quiet tension, a gentle but persistent awareness that something important had shifted. Naeli continued her work as before, but now each task carried more meaning. Every glance shared, every smile exchanged, seemed to echo the unspoken words between them. John, too, found himself noticing small details about her that he had once taken for granted. The way her hair caught the sunlight, the way her hands moved with careful precision, the soft but firm way she expressed herself. One afternoon, while repairing a fence damaged by the remnants of the last storm, a small accident occurred. Naeli slipped on the wet ground, her foot catching on a loose board. She cried out, and John was instantly at her side, steadying her and ensuring she had not been hurt. His hand brushed hers, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had been quietly growing. For a moment, The world outside the ranch, the gossip, the prejudice, and the uncertainty seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, standing close and aware of each other in a way that went beyond friendship. That evening, after the animals were fed and the work completed, John and Naeli sat by the fire, the orange glow illuminating their faces. The silence was comfortable, filled with the quiet presence of understanding and trust. Naeli spoke softly, recounting memories from her childhood, the songs and stories of her people, and the lessons she had learned from her family. John listened, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. Then John spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Naeli," he began, "I know this might be sudden, but I need to tell you how I feel."
I care for you more than I ever expected to care for anyone.
"I don't just want you here for the work you do or the company you bring. I want you to stay as part of my life. I want you to be with me." She had anticipated many things, but not these words. She had expected kindness, friendship, perhaps respect, but not a confession that carried the weight of commitment. For a moment she could not speak, her mind swirling with fear, hope, and a deep longing she had not admitted to herself. She thought of her life before the ranch, the dangers and loneliness she had endured, and the uncertainty of the future. And yet, in that moment, with the fire flickering and John's eyes steady upon her, she felt something shift within her, a sense of belonging she had never experienced, a feeling that perhaps this was exactly where she was meant to be. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief and overwhelming emotion. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. "John, I feel the same," she admitted softly. "I didn't think it was possible, but I care for you too." Her voice trembled, but it carried a quiet strength, a truth that could not be denied. They sat together in silence, the moment stretching long and unbroken. Neither spoke again, yet the words had been said, the emotion shared. A turning point had been reached, the beginning of a partnership neither had anticipated, but both had come to need. In that silence, filled only with the crackling of the fire and the whispering wind outside, a new understanding was born, one of love, respect, and mutual commitment. The following days were filled with a new energy, a quiet joy that infused even the simplest tasks. Naeli worked with renewed purpose, her laughter more frequent, her smile brighter. John found himself watching her with admiration, pride, and a sense of gratitude he had never known before. The small routines of the ranch, feeding the animals, tending the garden, repairing fences, now carried a deeper meaning, strengthened by the bond that had blossomed between them. Yet they both knew the road ahead would not be easy. The town and the people around them were not yet ready to accept their connection fully. Gossip still lingered, and prejudices persisted. Naeli feared rejection and misunderstanding. While John worried about her safety and happiness, they understood that their growing bond would be tested. But they also realized that their trust, respect, and love for each other gave them the strength to face whatever challenges awaited. One evening, under the vast desert sky, Naeli and John walked together along the edge of the ranch, watching the stars appear one by one. The cool night air carried a sense of peace and possibility. Naeli spoke softly, reflecting on how much had changed since the night she first sought shelter. She had come seeking safety for a single night, yet she had found something far more profound: companionship, understanding, and the beginnings of love. John squeezed her hand gently, his voice calm but filled with certainty. "I never expected you to stay, Naeli. But now that you have, I can't imagine life without you. Whatever the world thinks, whatever challenges come, I want us to face them together." You are part of my life now, and I hope you will stay, not just for a night, but for as long as you want." Nayeli looked into his eyes, seeing the honesty and warmth reflected there. She felt the truth of his words deep in her heart. The fear she had carried for so long, the fear of leaving, of being rejected, of not belonging, began to fade. In its place was a quiet certainty, a sense that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as partners, united by trust, courage, and love. In the days that followed, Nayeli and John continued to build their life together on the ranch. Their relationship deepened with each shared task, each quiet conversation, and each small gesture of care. They began to imagine a future together, one that honored both their lives and the unique strengths each brought to the partnership. They understood that the journey would not be easy, but they also knew that they had found something rare and invaluable, an enduring connection that could withstand the trials of the world outside. And so, the turning point had arrived. A night of shelter had led to weeks of companionship, which had grown into something neither Nayeli nor John had expected, but both had come to cherish. The bond they shared had transformed into a deeper, lasting commitment, rooted in respect, understanding, and love. They had faced challenges together, both from the land and from the people around them, and they had emerged stronger, more connected, and ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. The desert, vast and timeless, stretched around them, a silent witness to their journey. Nayeli realized that she had found not just safety, but belonging and love. John realized that he had found a partner who completed his life in ways he had never imagined. And in that quiet, enduring bond, they both knew that their story, born from a single act of kindness, was only beginning. The days that followed John and Nayeli's heartfelt confession were filled with a quiet joy that neither had experienced before. Their bond, forged through necessity, trust, and shared hardship, had grown into a deep and enduring love. Life on the ranch continued, but now every small task, every moment together, carried a new meaning. Feeding the animals, tending the garden, repairing fences, everything they did side by side was infused with warmth, laughter, and a sense of partnership. Nayeli felt a calm certainty she had never known. She had found more than shelter, more than safety. She had found a place where she truly belonged. Despite their happiness on the ranch, the outside world remained cautious, if not suspicious. The townspeople still whispered about the unusual pair, some unable to accept the bond between an Apache woman and a rancher. Yet, over time, their opinions began to shift. Nayeli's courage and skill, demonstrated during the storm and the snake incident, had earned her respect from those who once doubted her. People began to see that she was not an outsider to fear, but a person of strength and character, someone who contributed meaningfully to the community. Slowly, the walls of prejudice began to crack, though not all were willing to fully embrace the change. John and Nayeli faced these challenges together, finding comfort and strength in one another. Every day, their trust and understanding grew. John marveled at Nayeli's resilience and intelligence, appreciating not just her skills but the warmth and compassion she brought to life on the ranch. Nayeli admired John's steadfastness, his gentle guidance, and his unwavering respect for her as a partner. Together they created a life that balanced practicality with affection, work with joy, and responsibility with shared dreams. One afternoon, after a morning of tending the animals and repairing fences, John surprised Nayeli with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked along the edge of the desert. He handed them to her with a shy smile, a gesture both simple and profound. Nayeli's eyes filled with tears, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. She realized that love was not only shown in grand declarations, but in these small acts of care. in the moments that made each day feel meaningful. Time passed, and their relationship continued to deepen. They spoke often of their hopes for the future, dreams that included building a home together, perhaps expanding the ranch, and creating a life that honored both their traditions. Nayeli shared the stories and wisdom of her Apache heritage, while John offered the practical knowledge of ranch life and the quiet teachings of the land. Their conversations were filled with laughter, reflection, and sometimes serious discussions about the challenges they might face. In each discussion, they discovered the strength of their connection and the depth of their commitment to one another. Eventually, they decided to marry, a union that symbolized not only their love, but the blending of their two worlds. The ceremony was simple, held at the ranch with only close friends and neighbors who had come to respect and support them. Nayeli wore a dress she had made herself, decorated with small symbols of her heritage, while John wore his best suit, slightly worn but clean, reflecting his practical nature. They exchanged vows under the open sky, the vast desert stretching endlessly around them, a timeless witness to their union. The ceremony was quiet yet profound, filled with genuine emotion and the promise of a shared future. Life after their marriage brought both joy and challenges. They continued to work side by side on the ranch, tending to animals, repairing structures, and cultivating the land. There were days of hardship, droughts, storms, and the occasional disagreement. But through it all, they relied on one another. Their partnership was rooted in respect and communication, and they learned to navigate difficulties with patience, understanding, and compromise. Each challenge they faced only strengthened their bond, proving that their connection was resilient and enduring. Nayeli also began to build stronger ties with the broader community. Though some townspeople had initially doubted her, many had come to admire her courage, intelligence, and kindness. She taught others about her heritage, sharing stories of her people, lessons from the land, and the importance of resilience and respect. Children listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the songs, dances, and traditions she described. Adults began to see her not as an outsider, but as someone whose wisdom and presence enriched their lives. Slowly, acceptance and understanding grew, though they knew that prejudice could never be entirely erased. Together, John and Nayeli created a home filled with love, laughter, and the simple pleasures of everyday life. They celebrated small victories, like a healthy harvest or a well-tended garden, and comforted each other during difficult times. They shared meals by the fire, told stories under the starlit sky, and found joy in the quiet moments that others might overlook. Each day they strengthened the foundation of their life together, building not just a household, but a partnership grounded in trust, respect, and love. As the years passed, their connection deepened further. Nayeli became an integral part of the ranch, her skills and wisdom shaping the land and guiding the animals. John continued to admire her intelligence, courage, and gentle nature, realizing that he had found not just a wife, but a true partner in life. They shared dreams, joys, and even sorrows, always relying on one another and valuing the trust and love that had grown from a single night of shelter. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert and painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Nayeli and John stood together at the edge of the ranch, watching the horizon. The land stretched endlessly before them, wild and beautiful, just as it had the day she first arrived. Nayeli reflected on how far she had come, from a young woman seeking refuge from a storm to a wife, a respected member of the community, and a partner in building a life filled with purpose and love. John reflected on the unexpected gift of her presence in his life, the courage it had taken for her to trust him, and the joy she had brought to each day. Their life together was not perfect, no life ever is, but it was theirs, crafted through mutual respect, care, and unwavering support. They had faced challenges, both from the land and from the people around them, and they had emerged stronger and more connected than ever. The bond they had formed, born from a single act of kindness, had grown into a love that could endure storms, prejudice, and the uncertainties of life. In the quiet of the evening, as the desert sky filled with stars, Nayeli and John sat by the fire, hands entwined, sharing stories of the past and dreams of the future. They spoke softly, sometimes laughing, sometimes sitting in silence, simply enjoying the presence of one another. The desert, vast and timeless, seemed to hold its breath, bearing witness to the life they had built together and the love that had grown from something as simple as a single night of shelter. And so, their story came full circle. Nayeli, who had arrived seeking only temporary safety, had found a home, a partner, and a life rich with meaning. John, who had opened his doors out of compassion, had discovered a love deeper than he had ever imagined. Together they had created a life that honored both their worlds, faced challenges with courage, and built a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and devotion. Years later, as they tended the ranch together, John and Nayeli often reflected on the night it had all begun. The storm outside, the knock on the door, the simple request for shelter. It had set in motion a journey neither of them could have predicted. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and prejudice, yet through it all, they had found something extraordinary, a life built on love, trust, and mutual respect. And as they stood side by side, watching the desert stretch endlessly under the endless sky, they knew that they had found not just each other, but a home in the heart of the other, a home that no storm could ever destroy.